Okay, so this talk, A Free Digital Society, covers many different threats to the freedom of computer and internet users. People used to assume that use of the internet was a liberating technology. Well, it can be, and it can also be just the opposite. If we replace activities that we did with freedom in other ways with the internet, we can lose freedom. So I'm going to be covering various different threats to our freedom one by one. First, surveillance. Digital technology turns out to be Stalin's dream, making it possible to keep track of everything that everyone does. And you can be sure that governments want to do this, except perhaps if there's some government that really respects the freedom of the people, but certainly not the US government. Sometimes the surveillance is done through our own computers. For instance, Microsoft Windows has surveillance features that send data about the use of the computer. Adobe Flash Player has surveillance features called super cookies that websites can take advantage of. If you have a portable tracking and surveillance device, I see some people holding some in their hands. If you carry that around and you don't take the batteries out, it's sending signals saying where you are. And even if it doesn't use GPS to say exactly where you are, triangulation from multiple antennas can determine pretty close where you are. Some of them can also be activated in eavesdropping mode, where they transmit all the conversation around you. It's not necessary to speak right into the microphone for it to pick up what's being said and transmit that. And some smartphones can be given that feature through viruses. And then somebody who has no official permission from Big Brother can listen to the conversation around you. But sometimes the surveillance is done through computers beyond our control. For instance, in ISPs. In many countries, ISPs are required to record information such as what sites you contact, and store that information for a long time. Of course, once the police collect it, they could store it for even longer. In the US, the Pat Ryan Act enables the FBI to collect lots of commercial information about people without getting a real search warrant, and then the business is not allowed to tell you that it's been collected. So whatever the ISP records about you, it could pass on to Big Brother at any time. And sometimes computer systems with no relationship to you are keeping track of you. In the UK, all car travel is tracked. There are cameras by the roads that look at the license plates, recognize the numbers, and update the database. So they know where every car is. Now, I think this is a monstrous outrage. Now, in the US, I'm told some car rental companies put cell phones in the car to find out where it is all the time. And General Motors puts cell phones in all of its cars to find out where they are. So never use a General Motors car, and I wouldn't deal with Zipcar if I were you. I don't know for certain, but I've heard it reported that they track the cars. Many bicycle rental systems do the exact same thing. They know, of course, where you pick up the bike, they know where you leave it, and I think they keep track of everywhere you go in between there. So use your own bike. it's every citizen's duty to poke Big Brother in the eye. So, what do they do with this surveillance? Well, they might occasionally catch some criminals with it. And they have, of course, the usual two boogeymen. Either it's terrorists or it's child pornography. But they exaggerate the danger of these. When they try to say the term child pornography is a lie, because some of those so-called children are 17 years old. In fact, people in the U.S. have faced charges of distributing child pornography for taking pictures of themselves and giving them to their lovers. There are places in the U.S. where these people can lawfully have sex, but if they take pictures of themselves doing it, that is a crime. Now, the other boogeyman does some harm, but we've got to realize that government power is more dangerous. For instance, we don't know, and we will never know until there's an honest and thorough investigation, who was involved in the September 2001 attacks. But for the sake of argument, let's assume it really was just 20 fanatics with some other helpers and no support from the Bush administration. Well, which did more damage? They killed almost 3,000 people from America, whereupon Bush killed 4,500 or so from America by launching an invasion of Iraq. And that's not to count the hundreds of thousands of Iraqis whose deaths Bush is responsible for also. So which is the bigger danger? And if you compare around the world, you'll see that governments can do a lot more harm than under organizations. And then there are other dangers that are much bigger. For instance, in September 2001, cars killed around 4,000 people in the U.S. And they did it again in October and November and December and every month since then. It's around 4,000 people who get killed in car accidents in the U.S. and a much larger number get badly injured. So why don't we have a global war on car accidents? I guess because that wouldn't serve some other ulterior motive. So don't be stampeded into giving up your freedom just because there are some real dangers. The police will always say, if only we could collect all the information about everything, our job would be easier. It sure would be, but we can't tolerate their jobs being too easy because that's very dangerous. And our Constitution was drawn up with that fact in mind. Another interesting point is that a representative of the worldwide recorded music industry said at a conference, "We love child pornography because it's a great excuse to impose the measures we want, and then we can extend them to other things." Now, in a free society, you're not guaranteed anonymity when you go out in public. It's always possible someone will see you and notice you and remember. But this information is diffuse. To find it and collect it in order to really keep track of someone requires work. Well, the work can be done sometimes, but that's because it's so much work, it's only done when there's a specific important reason to investigate someone. But the surveillance information collected and recorded about people by digital technology is compact and ready for use in inquiries about everyone. And this is exactly what any tyrant will find most useful. By the way, you shouldn't ever take Amtrak, because Amtrak checks people's IDs. take a bus instead. In that, for trips of the sort of distance where you might use a train or a bus, you can avoid surveillance that way. Let's push back, and let's demand that Amtrak stop checking the identities of passengers. There's no reason for it anyway. If you watch The Longest Day, you will find out that anyone who wanted to blow up a train wouldn't have to ride on it. So they're not really preventing anything of any importance. So when surveillance is done through our own computers, we can protect ourselves by using software that's under our control. But when it's done through other systems, such as in an ISP or with cameras on the side of the road, there's not much we can do to protect ourselves from surveillance. If facial recognition cameras become commonplace, then people's movements on the street could be tracked and recorded just like the movements of cars in the UK. And we would have to start wearing masks as the only way to walk on the street without being tracked by Big Brother. So wouldn't you know, some countries are already making it illegal to wear a mask. In France, it was recently made illegal to be on the street with your face covered. The excuse they had was that a tiny number of women who covered their faces for religious reasons, and they wanted to supposedly help those women by forcing them to do what they didn't want to do. How it's going to help them, it's not clear, but it certainly is a preemptive strike against what people may need to do in 20 years so that they are not tracked everywhere they go. The second threat to our freedom in cyberspace is censorship. We used to think that the internet would defeat censorship. That's because the governments weren't very advanced in their methods for censorship. The internet was developing very fast and government censors couldn't keep up. But now they're catching up. Pushed by China, which bought lots of equipment developed by US companies for censorship, censoring the internet has now become quite effective when it's backed up by a government willing to threaten people in other ways. It's become effective enough that people can't use the internet to organize in Iran, for instance. The government's ability to punish those who would do it is too great. The government can fine them, the government can stop them. And censorship of the internet is spreading to countries that we wouldn't ordinarily label as dictatorships. But perhaps we have to have second thoughts. Several years ago, Denmark imposed filtering on access to foreign websites. The list of pages that was censored was a secret. The first rule of censorship is you don't talk about censorship. Someone leaked that list and it was posted on WikiLeaks. 3 cheers for WikiLeaks. And then that WikiLeaks page was added to the censored list. Australia has been talking about internet censorship for several years. So far, the filtering of access to foreign websites has been blocked, but they do have censorship of links. Electronic Frontiers Australia was forced to remove a link to a foreign political website on pain of fines of $11,000 a day. So that's political censorship in Australia. And the UK is talking about a system of supposedly, well, a system of getting ISPs to block access. And the ISPs would be doing this voluntarily, but it wouldn't be voluntary for the internet users. Spain recently passed a law allowing the government to order websites shut without a trial and order access to foreign websites blocked by filtering without a trial. It's the same in France, I believe. And I know someone in China who is going to offer a censorship beating service to people in France and Spain. The point being that they'd be able to surf more freely from China. You see, the Chinese government is not particularly concerned with access to pages in French or Spanish. Meanwhile, the U.S. government is considering laws to shut down websites in various ways. Not at present filtering, as far as I know. So censorship is spreading around the world. The idea that in a free country you don't censor the internet is fading fast under the pressure of those who want to censor our information. Censorship can take other forms too. In the UK, some people were they were faced with charges that could have imprisoned them for downloading material from a US government website. And it's common in the UK for people to be charged with possessing information. So if we want freedom to communicate, we have to fight for it, and we have to refuse to be led astray by the boogeymen that they cite, which are all less dangerous than government censorship and surveillance has the potential to be. The next threat I wish to mention comes from the use of data formats designed to restrict the users. Most audio distributed on the net and most video distributed on the net are in formats that restrict the user in some way or other. And even your own data that you enter into an application in your computer can be stored in a format designed to restrict you. Some of these formats are secret. For instance, last week I gave a speech at Stanford. They wanted to stream it, but I found out that their streaming uses a secret format, so I said no. I'd rather it not be streamed than that it be streamed in a way that pressures people to use software that doesn't respect their freedom. Italian public television also uses a secret format. It's called VC1. Supposedly it's a standard, but it's a secret standard. You can't get the details of that format without signing a non-disclosure agreement. How can that be considered a legitimate standard? And yet you have a semi-government agency using it. There are also US sites using secret formats such as Hulu, which therefore you should never use. Then there are formats which are not, oh, and also the applications that restrict your use of your own data are typically using secret formats to store your data in, so that you can't get full and flexible access to the data you entered. This is a common practice by application developers when they think they have a dominant position. Then, by preventing interoperability, they figure it will eliminate any possibility for their competitors. I would recommend prohibiting this. The other way that formats can restrict us if they're not secret is if they're patented. Because then it can happen that all the authorized players for those formats are designed to restrict the users, and that other players are prohibited and face the danger of patent infringement lawsuits. Widely used formats that are patented include MP3, MPEG-2, MPEG-4, which is why those pose a problem. So if I make a file of audio, I never use MP3 format. I use OGG Vorbis format, which is not patented. The next threat to our freedom in cyberspace comes from software that the users do not control. Proprietary software. With software, there are just two possibilities. Either the users control the program, or the program controls the users. If the users have certain essential freedoms, then the users, both individually and collectively, control the program and control the computing that they do with that program. And this we call free software, free as in freedom. But if the users don't have enough freedom to effectively have control over the program, then the program controls them. And of course, some entity controls the program, and through it controls the users. So a non-free program sets up a system of unjust power, which is why I've been campaigning to help everyone escape from non-free software since 27 years ago. So the essential freedoms that users need in order to have effective control over the software are freedom 0, the freedom to run the program as you wish. Freedom 1, the freedom to study the source code and change it so it does your computing as you wish. Freedom 2, the freedom to help others. That's the freedom to make exact copies and redistribute them to others when you wish. And freedom 3 is the freedom to contribute to your community by making and distributing copies of your modified versions when you wish. Each of these freedoms is essential. Without it, the users are controlled in some way by the program. For instance, there are proprietary programs that don't even give you freedom 0. There's a program for managing websites whose license forbids using it to publish anything that criticizes the developer. So in this case, non-free software literally takes away your freedom of speech. If you don't have freedom 1, the freedom to study and change the source code and really use the results, you really use your modified version, then the code controls you, because it's set up to do certain things and set up not to do certain other things. So through that, whoever controls the code of that program controls you. Freedom 2 is essential so people can cooperate with each other. Without that, the program is dividing people, keeping them divided. So it's an attack on our community. And freedom 3 is crucial so that If some people make an improved version, they're free to publish it so we can all run it. Without Freedom 3, yes, each of us would be free to make the same change, but what a waste it would be to have to write this change 1,000,000 times or more. And not only that, there are lots of users who don't know how to program, and they don't know how to write the change for themselves. So if we didn't have Freedom 3, they would be left out. But with Freedom 3, when the people who do know how to program release a modified version, the non-programmer users get to run it too. So they also benefit, therefore, from living in a society where people have these freedoms, even though they don't know how to exercise these freedoms directly. So, in 1983, I announced the plan to develop the GNU operating system. GNU is a recursive acronym. It's a joke. It stands for GNU's Not Unix. Of course, it wouldn't be funny if it didn't have another meaning. Its other meaning is the name of this animal. But what makes it really funny is, according to the dictionary, the G is silent and it's pronounced new. So every time you want to write the word new, you can spell it G-N-U and you've got a joke. Perhaps not a very good joke, but there are lots of them. So this word is the most humor-charged word in the English language, and I had the opportunity to use it as the name of a programming project, so I couldn't resist. However, when it's the name of our system, please do not follow the dictionary. You've got to pronounce it right. Pronounce it GNU. If you pronounce it new, if you talk about the new operating system, you'll get people confused. Since we started working on it over 27 years ago, it's not new anymore. The other pronunciation error you need to avoid sounds like Linux. You'll find an amazing number of people talk about the GNU system and call it Linux. That's because they've heard a mistaken story of how the system originated. In the system as we use it, there is a piece which is Linux. That piece is called the kernel. It's the program that allocates the computer's resources to all the other programs you run. And that piece really is Linux, and it was developed by Linus Torvalds starting in 1991 as proprietary software. But then, in 1992, he decided to make it free software. And as it happens, the GNU system was almost complete at that point. The only thing missing was the kernel. So people put together the almost complete GNU system and this kernel Linux. They made a complete free operating system. And for the first time, it was possible to buy a PC and use it and have control over your computing. So he made an important contribution to the community by liberating Linux, but Linux is not the whole system. Linux is just one piece. So when you talk about the whole system, please give us equal mention. If you call the system GNU plus Linux or GNU/Linux, people will get an idea of where the system comes from and why it exists, namely a project explicitly aimed at giving all of you freedom. So that's why we have those stickers with the dynamic duo, the flying GNU and the flying penguin. Now, just one more thing I'd like to mention about this topic. Schools morally must teach free software exclusively. If they teach non-free software, they're teaching dependence. That's to impose a dependence on society as a whole. Here's how their plan works. The schools get these gratis copies and they teach the students to use them. The students become dependent and then they graduate. After they graduate, the developer does not offer those ex-students gratis copies. Oh no. And they go to work for companies. Well, maybe that won't happen in the US anymore, but it used to. So, and of course, the developer doesn't offer those companies gratis copies. because they're giving out these gratis copies for the same reason others hand out gratis doses of addictive drugs to get people hooked. The first dose is gratis. Once you're dependent, then you have to pay. Now, schools wouldn't hand out and inject these addictive drugs, and they shouldn't teach people non-free software, because schools have a social mission to educate good citizens of a strong, capable, independent, cooperating, and free society. In computing, that means teaching free software and only free software. It means teaching people to function in a free software community, and thus in a free society. There's a deeper reason for the education of the best programmers. Some people are natural-born programmers, and at 10 to 13 years, they become fascinated with computing and they want to learn how everything works. But when they ask the teacher, how does this program do this? If it's proprietary, the teacher can only say, I'm sorry, it's a secret, we can't find out. So a proprietary program is knowledge withheld. It shouldn't be in a school. It shouldn't be tolerated in a school. Leaving so soon? I hope it wasn't something I said. I'm saying, read it and you'll understand everything. And they'll read it since they're fascinated and they yearn to understand. And the teacher can say, if you find any point you can't figure out by yourselves, show it to me and we'll figure it out together. This gives our natural-born programmers the chance to learn a very important lesson. That code is not clear, so that's the wrong way to write it. You see, natural-born programmers tend to be very clever, and they can see lots of ways to write code that will do the job, but other people will have trouble understanding why. That's not good code. To learn about all the things they should. Saying, read it and you'll understand everything. And they'll read it since they're using free software, even if it takes me extra time. I'm willing to take extra time to do what my conscience says is right, and otherwise I can't take this class. It's hard for a teacher to say no to that, because it's so evidently sincere and not just an attempt to get out of doing some work. And if you explain it right, it's even a desire to learn rather than be kept in the dark. It's hard for a teacher to have contempt for that. Anyway, moving on. There are more threats to our freedom in the internet. One of them is non-free software in the web pages we visit. Many web pages contain programs written in JavaScript. And these are installed silently and automatically into the browser, and most of them are not free software. So you're losing control over your computing if you allow them to execute. I just turn off JavaScript. There are some sites that won't work, and I complain fairly often. And you've got to complain too. If enough people complain, they'll make that JavaScript free, or they'll make the site work with JavaScript disabled. It's not that hard, but they just don't think we care. So we have to show them that we do care. But services also can affect our freedom. They don't raise the same issue as programs. And in particular, whether the software running on a server is free or not does not directly affect us if we're users of the service. It affects the person running the service. If he's using non-free software, he has lost control of the computing in his computer. Well, that's bad for him. So I hope, for his sake, that he replaces it. but I'm not going to be angry at him or try to punish him because he's the victim of this non-free software. There's no reason for that. I would just tell him if the issue comes up that I hope that he will escape from it. But the server itself can affect our freedom in other ways. For instance, if we let our computing be done in the server, we lose control over it. That's known as software as a service. When instead of doing your computing in your own computer, you send all the relevant data to somebody else's server, and your computing gets done in that server by software you can't see or touch. So you lose control completely over that computing. So, in order to have control over your computing, you just have to refuse to use software as a service. But, in fact, software as a service is even worse than that, because beyond being the equivalent of a proprietary program, there are other bad things about it. I explained how, yes, some proprietary programs do surveillance, which means they have specific code to send data to somebody else's server. With software as a service, the user has to send all the relevant data to the server, which means it comes out the same. The server has your data. It didn't require any special piece of code to send it. You were convinced to send it, but the result's the same. In addition, proprietary programs often have other malicious features, such as backdoors, that allow someone to remotely send commands and alter your computing. For instance, Microsoft Windows has a universal backdoor. Microsoft can use that backdoor to install changes in the software in the machine, any change in any program, without asking permission of the nominal owner of that computer. So once Microsoft has Windows running in the computer, Microsoft has owned that computer. Windows is literally malware. But let's compare that with software as a service. If you're sending your data to someone's server and your computing gets done there, well, naturally, he can change the software in his own computer. He should be able to change the software in his own computer. But when he does, he changes how your computing gets done, and he doesn't have to tell you or ask you. So it's the equivalent of the universal backdoor that's in Windows, produced through a different mechanism, of course, but the result is the same. He has the power to change how your computing gets done at any time without asking you. So, software as a service is inherently equivalent to using a proprietary program with surveillance features and a universal backdoor. And the only remedy is don't use software as a service. That's why we have the buttons over there that say don't SaaS me. It's SaaS, software as a service. Fortunately, software as a service is pretty rare. It's an unusual case. It's important already, but it's a tiny fraction of all the websites in the world. Most websites just if these are all the websites, most of them just publish information. That's not doing your computing. That's just making stuff available for you to look at. Okay, that's not taking any control over you. There's no reason you shouldn't look. But then let's consider the sites that have a non-trivial service. Most of them, in most cases, the service is some kind of communication with others, which is not your own computing in a personal sense. It's something you're doing with others. You couldn't possibly do it by yourself in your own computer anyway. So those are not software as a service either. There are also collaborative projects such as Wikipedia. If you are editing a Wikipedia page, the computing you're doing is not your computing, it's Wikipedia's computing. You're helping Wikipedia do it. So who ought to have control over that? Wikipedia should. And it does, because Wikipedia runs its own servers and controls the software on them and controls the computing it does. And no wrong is being done to you when you do things in those servers, because you're helping Wikipedia. You're not doing it for yourself. On the other hand, software as a service does exist, and it is a real issue. For instance, Google Docs invites people to do their word processing in a Google server instead of doing it in their own computers with their own copy of a word processor. We have fine, free software word processors that you could use to do that and have control of your computing. But if you use Google Docs, you lose control of your computing. Of course, Google Docs also requires the user to run a large, non-free JavaScript program. So it has two problems. So software as a service is not very common among services, but some examples of it are important. So it's important to think about the issue. Another thing that a service can do is misuse your data. If you give your data to a service, you better, if you're thinking of giving your data to a service, you better ask yourself, who am I giving this data to? Who might get it? Is Big Brother going to get it? If you're giving it to a U.S. company, the answer is probably yes. So you need to consider that question, mostly when the data is private. For publication, it's much less of an issue, because when you publish something, you're saying, okay, everybody look at this. Well, what harm can they do then? If they show it to somebody else, well, you said it was okay. You published it. You invited everyone to look. So they can't really do much harm to you by showing it to other members of the public. They could conceivably lose it or change it. Well, but if they made a practice of changing what people posted, the users would notice. So they probably won't do that very much. You shouldn't rely on them to keep it. You should have another copy somewhere, but you don't have to worry too much about that in practice. And they could lose it, of course. Anybody who's keeping data for you could lose it. That's just the fact of life. So you should have other copies if it's important. Maybe it's not important. Maybe you don't care if it gets deleted in a month. So with services that publish things for you, there's not a big need to worry. But if you're entrusting data to a service which is not meant to be published, then there's a lot of room for abuse. This is why Facebook is not your friend. Facebook's business is based on collecting data from people and using it for harmful purposes. And Facebook has done a series of other nasty things to people. They keep trying new, clever ways to mistreat people. And the best thing is, don't touch it. That's why I do not have a Facebook account. Someone else apparently made a page that pretends to be me. It's not mine. Another threat to our freedom is the war on sharing. The attempt to stop us from sharing published information with each other by hook or by crook, no matter what the cost and harm to society caused by their war. You see, digital technology makes copying and sharing very easy, and that's tremendously useful because sharing is good. Sharing builds community. To attack sharing is to attack community. It's extremely antisocial. And that's what publishing companies today are doing. They wish to attack sharing, and they will go to any lengths to do it. They will destroy anything that gets in their way, no matter how important it might be, such as basic principles of justice. For instance, that people shall not be punished without due process of law. Around the world, we see laws being put into effect to punish people by disconnection of their internet connections in response to unproved accusations that they have been good members of society and shared with other people. Because sharing is so easy and so natural, only draconian and vicious measures could possibly have a chance of stopping it. So it's no surprise that over and over they propose draconian, vicious methods, like suing teenagers for hundreds of thousands of dollars of imaginary damages, like designing our technology to restrict us. That's known as digital restrictions management, or DRM, also referred to as digital handcuffs. People saw this first in DVDs. The format of a DVD includes the provision for the video to be encrypted for the sole purpose of restricting the users. So DVDs were designed as malware, or more precisely, the software in the player is malware. And the DVD conspiracy said that anyone who wanted to make a DVD player was required to promise to keep the format secret and build their DVD players to restrict the user, just like all the other DVD players. Now, how do I know about the DVD conspiracy? It's not secret. Conspiracies like this to restrict our access to technology ought to be a felony, just like conspiracies to fix prices. But in fact, our government puts its weight behind those conspiracies and has passed laws specifically to give those conspiracies more power over us. So they don't need to hide. They boast about what they're doing. That's how I know. In 1998, after people had figured out the secret format of DVDs and published a free program that could decrypt the DVD so you could watch your DVD with free software, various companies purchased the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. In the U.S. Congress, under plutocracy, laws are for sale to the companies that are biggest. And that's the case in this area as well as in other areas. You'll notice that nothing has been done to better regulate undersea oil drilling so that there won't be another big spill. Nothing much has been done to regulate the banks so that they won't cause another crash. It would be so easy to enact the Glass-Steagall Act again. After all, that protected us for decades, and it was corruptly removed in the 1990s by legislators who had been bought. And now it caused a crash, well, we could put it back again. But no, because the banksters still have so much power that nothing can be done by this government to protect us from them. So, we see the same thing in the area of computer users' freedom. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act prohibits distribution of anything that can break digital handcuffs, and thus established censorship of software in the U.S. And the U.S., using its trade power keeps pushing similar laws on other countries, spreading this harm around the world. For a while we saw a lot of this problem in music being distributed on things that looked like compact discs but were not written properly, so we called them corrupt discs. And also with internet distribution. And then it mostly went away. The record companies began selling music without DRM, and they discovered people kept buying, so they did more of it, and then Apple got rid of its DRM for music only. But other media on iTunes are still likely to have digital restrictions management, so iTunes is still a bad thing. You shouldn't deal with it. And then we see it coming back. There are now various music streaming services that tell people that they can listen to music gratis by running a non-free program, a client program, which streams the music in some secret format. And the reason this program is non-free and the format is secret is to restrict the user. Because the most natural feature to add to that program would be to save the data in a file. But they don't want that feature to exist. So they are trying to give people the idea that because this is streaming, it doesn't save the data. They're trying to make it seem like a natural consequence, when really it's just their decision that they've imposed, because it's non-free software that they control. So we need to take action against them. One of these streaming services just demonstrated how it gives them power, because they used to let people do unlimited gratis streaming, but they just decided to impose a limit of a few hours a day, which shows you why you should insist on having your own copy, why you must, because otherwise you're letting somebody have power over you to exercise it against you at whatever's the worst moment for you, which is when they think they've got everybody and they can now mistreat everybody and get away with it. We also see digital restrictions management on books. That's what e-books are. Now, literally speaking, an e-book is just a book in a digital format. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. Whether you like it or not is just a matter of taste, not an ethical issue. But in fact, e-books are a scheme to take away the traditional freedoms of readers. For instance, there's the freedom to acquire a book anonymously by paying cash. With the publishers' e-books, and the example I know best is Amazon with the Amazon swindle. You can't get major books anonymously because the only place you can get them is from Amazon, and Amazon requires the users to identify themselves. So Amazon manages a big list of all the books that each user has acquired. Such a list is a threat to human rights, and we must not tolerate its existence anywhere. We don't need to ask whether Amazon in particular is trustworthy, because a priori, nobody could possibly be trustworthy for that information. Second, there's the freedom to give, lend, or sell the book to someone else when you wish. Amazon takes this away through digital handcuffs in the swindle and through total contempt for private property. Amazon says that you can't buy a book. You can only get a license to read one under Amazon's conditions. So Amazon doesn't believe you should be able to own a book. And finally, there's the freedom to keep a book for as long as you wish and read it as many times as you wish and pass it on to your heirs. Amazon took this away with a back door in the swindle. We know about this backdoor by observation. The software is non-free. No one can study that code and find out what it does. But people observed when Amazon used the backdoor to remotely delete thousands of copies of a particular book. These were authorized copies that people had obtained directly from Amazon, so Amazon knew exactly where they were and was able to send these commands to these swindles to erase them. And people saw this happen. That's how we know. And the book with which Amazon demonstrated the Orwellian nature of its product was 1984 by George Orwell. Then Amazon promised it would never do this again unless ordered by the state. How comforting. So, if you value your freedom, you must not use this device. But worst, this device is an attack on society. Imagine if you visit your friend and there are no books. And it's not that your friend is a non-reader, but rather all your friend's books are inside some device, and the only way your friend can lend them to you is by lending you his whole library, which is too much to ask of anyone, obviously. So no more lending books. It's not even really feasible for you to browse through your friend's books and see which ones you might want to read. It's too hard and would mean messing with his player. Make sure your friends think about this before they take that step. Make sure they understand that to become a swindle user is to break off their friendships with other people who read. Make sure they think about whether they really want to do that. Because if they buy one, having spent the money, they may feel that it's out of the question not to use it. But if you catch them before they buy one, then they can just decide not to. And make sure you inform all your friends and family of the things you don't want them to buy you, such as the swindle. By the way, its official name is the Kindle. And Kindle means to start a fire. Evidently, that's a reference to the back door, saying that they can use it to burn our books. They warned us, we just didn't understand. The final threat to our freedom inside... Oh, by the way, to fight against DRM, we've set up a campaign of protests called Defective by Design. You could find the campaign at defectivebydesign.org. Please sign up and participate in the protests. We need to make them bigger, because this is how we're pushing back against the companies that want to turn our technology into our jailers. The final threat to our freedom is precarity. Whatever you're doing in the internet, you don't have a right to keep doing it. If you want to print some handouts, some pamphlets, and give them out to people or sell them, you can just do it. You can buy a printer. You could buy it anonymously. And then you could print things and hand them out. And people can read them or not. And you can do this even if somebody doesn't like what you're saying. But that's not true in the internet. If you wanted to distribute that same text from a website, you would need cooperation from companies such as an ISP, a domain name registrar, maybe a hosting facility, and those companies say in their contracts that they can cut you off. Basically, you don't have a right you can stand on to keep doing the things you're doing. This was brought home by the U.S. government's denial of service attack against WikiLeaks. As the U.S. government, in a dirty tricks campaign, went to the companies that were cooperating in the ordinary way with WikiLeaks, as they did with thousands of others, and told them to cut off WikiLeaks, and they did. It's as if your phone line could get cut off if someone didn't like what you were saying. Someone would go to the phone company and say, cut off their service. Imagine if if you couldn't ride the subway because somebody didn't like you and convinced the subway not to let you pay for a ride anymore. Well, that doesn't happen in those cases, but what happens in cyberspace is comparable. So Amazon was providing hosting to WikiLeaks, and people in the government said to Amazon, we don't like your helping them, cut them off. So Amazon cut them off. And there was no need to go to court or show any cause. Amazon just said we won't. And various domain names that WikiLeaks was using got shut down. And then there were other servers that they were kicked off of. And then payment companies started refusing to serve them. First PayPal, and then Visa and MasterCard. Now, if you're doing things in the physical world, if you wanted to sell those pamphlets or accept a donation, people could just give you cash. And you wouldn't need to beg for cooperation from anybody to receive the cash. Of the Church of Emacs. I bless your computer, my child. It looks like your computer needs an exorcism. In the Church of Emacs today, we have no services, only software. We have a great, well, I should explain that Emacs started out as an extensible text editor that I wrote, which became a way of life for many users because it was extended so much they could do all their computing without ever exiting Emacs. And then it became a church with the launch of the newsgroup alt.religion.emacs, which you might be amused to visit. In the Church of Emacs, we have a great schism between several rival versions of Emacs. And we also have saints, but fortunately no gods. Instead of gods, we adore the one true editor. To be a member of the Church of Emacs, you must recite the Confession of the Faith. You must say, there is no system but GNU, and Linux is one of its kernels. Then if you become a real expert, you can celebrate that with our ceremony, the Fubar Mitzvah. In which you chant lines from our sacred scriptures, that is to say, the system source code. We also have the cult of the Virgin of Emacs. The Virgin of Emacs means anyone who has never used Emacs. And According to the Church of Emacs, offering the virgin the opportunity to lose Emacs virginity is a blessed act. We also have the Emacs pilgrimage, which consists of invoking all the commands of Emacs in alphabetical order. The Church of Emacs has certain advantages compared with other churches I won't mention. For instance, to be a saint in the Church of Emacs does not require celibacy. So if you're wandering in search of a church to be saintly in, you might consider ours. But it does require living a life of moral purity. You must exorcise whatever evil proprietary operating systems have possessed computers under your control or set up for your regular use, and then install a wholly free operating system, and then only use and install free software with it on the system. If you make this vow and you live by it, then you too will be a saint, and you too will have the right to wear a halo, if you can find one, because they don't make them anymore. Sometimes people have asked whether, according to the Church of Emacs, it is a sin to use the other editor VI. It's true that VI is the editor of the beast. But using a free implementation of VI is not a sin, it's a penance. And people have sometimes asked whether my Halo is really an old computer disk. This is no computer disk, this is my Halo. But it was a computer disk in a previous life. So thank you. I am going to auction this adorable GNU for the benefit of the Free Software Foundation. This adorable GNU needs a home. And if you have a penguin, you must get a GNU for it, because, as we all know, a penguin can't hardly function without it. If you are the purchaser, I'll be happy to sign it either on the card or the body. And the FSF can accept payment either in cash or check or with a credit card. When you bid, please wave your arm and shout out the amount you're bidding, like 5,000. So I'm going to start at $25. Do I get $25 for this adorable GNU?
25.
Ooh.
25.
Okay, I've got 25. Do I get 30?
30.
I've got 30. Do I get 35? I've got 30. Do I get 35?
35.
I've got 35. Do I get 40? I've got 35. Do I get 40? Do I get $40 for this adorable GNU? Needs a home. Do I get 40?
40.
I've got 40. Do I get 45? I've got 40. Do I get 45? $45 for this adorable GNU? Do I get 45? I've got 45. Do I get 50? Do I get 50? I've got 45. Do I get... How much?
50.
I've got 50. Do I get 55? I've got 50. Do I get 55? $55 to the free software. I've got... How much?
55.
I've got 55. Do I get 60? I've got 55. Do I get 60? $60 to the Free Software Foundation to defend your freedom. Do I get $60? What? I've got 60. Do I get 65? I've got 60. Do I get 65? Do I get $65 for this adorable GNU? $65 to the Free Software Foundation to defend your freedom? Do I get 65? I've got 65. Do I get 70? I've got 65. Do I get 70? Do I get 70? I've got 70. Do I get 75? I've got 70. Do I get 75? Do I get 75? Do I get 75? Last chance to offer 75 or more for this adorable GNU to the Free Software Foundation. Last chance. I've got 75. I've got 75. Do I get 80? Do I get 80 for this adorable GNU to the Free Software Foundation to defend your freedom? Do I get 80? Do I get 80? Last chance to bid 80 or more. Do I get 80 or more? Last chance. Going.
105.
I've got 105. Do I get 120? I want to accelerate a bit, you know. Normally I go up by around, I guess I could accept 115. I want to go up by at least 10 once it's over 100, or it will just creep up and take a long time. Do I get 115? Do I get 115 for this adorable GNU? Do I get 115? I've got 105. Last chance to bid 115 or more. Do I get 115 or more? Last chance going.
120.
I've got 120. I've got 120. Do I get 130? Do I get 130? I've got 120. Do I get 130 for this adorable GNU? Do I get 130? Do I get 130 to the Free Software Foundation to defend your freedom? Do I get 130? Last chance to bid 130 or more. Do I get 130? Do I get 130? Last chance. Going. I've got 150. Do I get 160? Do I get 160 for this adorable GNU, which I'm adoring more with every minute? Do I get 160 to the Free Software Foundation to defend your freedom? Do I get 160? Last chance to bid 160 or more. I've got 150. Do I get 160? Last chance. Going. Gone for 150. You can buy a book or a pin or button or keyring, and you can also take stickers. The stickers are still available here. Take as many stickers as you can make good use of. So, are there questions?
So this entire talk, you've been talking about free software as in free freedom. What about free software as in money?
I really don't care. I don't see any ethical issue in the question of whether you pay or not to get a copy, so it's not something I need to talk about. I've sold copies of free software. The FSF sold lots of copies for a while. There's nothing wrong with that.